Since 1961, really, when John F. Kennedy issued his first order requiring federal contractors to stop discriminating, companies have introduced all kinds of interventions, and the frustrating thing is no one had really studied which of these interventions, what kinds of innovations have been effective in promoting diversity. I will say that this is not exclusive, this characteristic is not exclusive to the domain of diversity. Most management practices spread because either a pinnacle company in an industry or a very high-profile management firm, management consulting firm, gets an idea and they trot it out and try to sell it to other companies. So most management is not evidence-based. It's not based in research. And that's true for all kinds of decisions. It's true for top management compensation, for example. It's true for strategy. It's true for acquisition strategy. But here I think we offer a pretty comprehensive picture of, in diversity management, of all the things you can do, which things actually lead to increases in diversity. There's a very nice book by Bob Sutton and Jeff Pfeffer at Stanford, published by Harvard Business Review Press, that looks at how little managers use actual evidence to make decisions and suggests that in one area after another, managers could be making decisions based on the kind of research we present, but they mostly aren't. Our research challenges what a lot of companies have been doing for the last 30 years because it suggests that you can't train people to stop discriminating. You can't change what's in their heads through punishment, as in through grievance procedures, through diversity training, or by creating narrow rules that prevent them from hiring person X and force them to hire person Y. But it's not surprising that that doesn't work. What generally works in management is to give people a goal and to encourage them to try to pursue the goal. And what generally works in reducing bias is not any kind of training or punishment of people who exercise bias. It's just exposure to people from other groups, and we've seen that in sociological studies since World War II. The biggest natural experiment was during World War II when whites and blacks who were in different companies in the US Army were put together because really of the high death rates in the European theater. So whites and blacks had not fought side by side, and they were forced to randomly in some of these companies in World War II, and whites' attitudes toward blacks changed 100% in the companies where they happened to be fighting next to blacks. So we know that the way to reduce bias is to put people working side by side. And Sandra has a terrific paper showing exactly that in companies. When you put people on self-managed teams working together, people who are usually in segregated jobs, but now they're working side by side, we see significant increases in, for example, women in management jobs. So I think the takeaway from our research is that the way to reduce bias is to fix the problem that jobs are segregated and that people don't work together. And you have to fix that first. You can't train away bias. That's what causes people to let go of their biases and to stop seeing each black person as a representative of a group, if you're white, to see each black person as an individual. And we know from tons of research since World War II that that's the best way to change what's in people's head, to change who they work with.
So, one takeaway point from our research is that, as a rule of thumb, if companies are considering new diversity practices, is to check, to do kind of a litmus test. Do these practices try to control managers and discipline them out of their biases, or do these practices actually engage and empower managers to promote, to lead a diversity initiative and diversity change?
When it comes to what's effective and what's not effective, it's pretty clear from our research that policies that try to control managers or punish them or retrain them just backfire. They don't do nothing. They have negative effects on subsequent managerial diversity. The exciting thing now is that our research has been picked up by the media quite a bit. We are increasingly invited to talk to executives, to talk to groups of lawyers, to talk to groups of litigators for the federal government. And through these different venues, we're seeing, on the one hand, a lot of people resonate with our findings. A lot of people say, this is exactly what I thought all along. Once they kind of understand the logic of what's going on in our analyses. I think the most promising thing is that a lot of top executives are trying to get their companies to rethink how they promote diversity. A lot of judges are trying to rethink what a settlement should look like in a discrimination case. A lot of lawyers are trying to push companies to do things that have been proven to be effective. And I'll say it's not only our research. What's unique about our research is we look at all kinds of different interventions at once, so we can assess the relative efficiency, say, of having a mentoring program, which has a huge positive effect on diversity in management, versus a mandatory diversity training, which only has a negative effect. But there are tons of other one-off studies of individual kinds of programs, and they almost always support what we see, which is, for example, that performance rating systems tend to be biased, so they tend not to solve the problem, that diversity training tends to elicit negative reactions, so a lot of times it doesn't help. And that mentoring systems, for example, are really good for people's careers.
Regarding the effect that our research has, I'm now in Israel, and as Frank, as the experience we have in the U.S., I'm invited to give talks for private companies, in the government. I'm actually on the Israeli Equal Employment Opportunity Commission advisory board, and I get to influence decisions regarding the best practices that the advisory board promotes, and all affected by our research. So I see that as a very positive outcome. Another thing that I'd like to add here is that although we found that diversity training is not effective, we understand that it's few million dollars business, and it's not going to go away. And this is why we did also further analysis to see, okay, well, you want to do diversity training, that's great. Let us tell you how to do it. You want to do it voluntary, you want to do it to emphasize the business case for diversity rather than the law and the legal procedures. And I see a difference over time. I don't know if we can relate it to our research, but I see a difference during the years in how people relate to diversity training and to our findings. I think compared to the US, other countries, I can talk about Europe and Israel, are less reluctant to use quotas, for the good and for the bad. I'm not necessarily promoting quotas, on the contrary, but there is more acceptance of this concept outside the US. I can say that in Israel, the US is regarded as a success case. So the title for the US case is that they're beyond diversity. They already, in the US, internalized the idea that diversity is a business must. And actually, this is where I come in to say, no, actually what we should learn from the US is what not to do, rather than what to do.
Did you want to come in?
if you look at different countries, a lot of countries have embraced practices developed in the U.S., partly through diffusion, through multinationals. For example, a lot of French companies are trying to copy practices they see in their American subsidiaries, and a lot of American companies have tried to export the policies they use in the U.S., but often that's very hard to do. So if you take the case of France, diversity management is much more about gender and age and disability than it is about race, ethnicity, and religion. And I think that makes the business very different, because what you need to do to promote gender equality is a little different than what you need to do to promote race, ethnic, and religious equality. And in France, companies don't keep numbers on race, ethnic, and religious inequality, which makes it very hard to know whether you have a successful policy. American companies, at least internally, know whether they're seeing movement in the right direction. And because countries are so different in what they're trying to, how they define diversity and what they promote as diversity, we see pretty big translations when, for example, American practices get copied in other countries. Well, it's very exciting to see HEC's Society and Organizations Initiative, led by Rudy Duran and a team of organizational sociologists. I was here a year ago for the Medici Summer School that they put on, and they brought in a team of just the top diversity researchers from mostly business schools all around, sociologists and psychologists, and trained for a week, 25 or more doctoral students who'd been highly recommended from institutions around the world. And I feel like this collaboration moved the projects of a lot of those students forward very rapidly. A lot of the people who I met there have been sending me new papers, and I feel like so SNO has been really a leader in trying to create international collaboration, and that's one of the things we see today, because we have yet another conference on diversity with some of the same people from last year, but also a lot of junior and mid-career people who have very exciting new research going on. So I feel like HEC is really trying to be an international center for collaboration, and part of that is through their collaboration with the Medici Summer School, with a couple of other top universities around the world, including MIT.
The idea of involving businesses is genius. It's essential because, for cross-fertilization, we can learn much more about what we're studying from the real-life experiences. And obviously, we eventually want to get to businesses, to get them to listen to us. And in a collaborative venue, I think it's the best place to create this kind of trust and dialogue and interaction that are most productive.
And I think one of the most important things about the SNO initiative is that it's spearheaded by 5 of the top companies in France. And we know that companies follow leaders. And so if those 5 companies start embracing the management practices that are effective, we know that other French companies will copy them, because that's where companies learn how to behave. They model behavior on the success cases.